Again, I've dropped all my bikes. When I dropped this bike, I was actually leaving. How's it going, everybody? Today I got a topic to talk about, and I guess I'll talk about my motorcycle history. I don't think I've actually talked about that before. First time on a bike. And my first bike was a CBR F3. And I got that guy right when basically right when I graduated high school. It came into my possession. And this was like a long ass time ago. I am like an old man. But it was back in, like, I don't know, it might have still been the late 90s, early 2000s when I got that bike. And it was in my possession for about 6 months. So that's how I learned to actually ride a bike, was with that CBR. And the CBR actually reminded me of, it actually reminds me a lot of this bike. It reminds me a lot of this SV. It was like a 94 CBR, so it was one of the earlier generations of the F3. And I think those bikes at the time had something like 90 horsepower and, I don't know, 40 something foot-pounds of torque. A little bit more power than this guy, but not that much more. It was, from what I can remember, it was like really, and I say from what I can remember because it was a long ass time ago, it was a very comfortable bike. I remember it was like, there was nothing, I would say that even the riding position of it was slightly a little bit more aggressive than this bike. So you gotta remember, like, bikes back in, like, that were created in the early 90s, mid 90s, they were, especially for the Supersport ones, they were not as aggressive as they are now. And another thing that I remember of that bike was, since it was my first bike, I remember the weight of it, and I pretty much can think that that was just in my mind because it was the first time I actually rode a bike. I'm pretty sure that thing is just a little bit over 400 pounds, but it felt heavy as hell. It was a very strange riding experience. It was like having a pendulum ball swung under your feet. And that was what it was like with that bike. I mean, I was just learning on it and everything. It was plenty fast though. I thought it was like the fastest thing ever. And I guess it's because, like, as far as like cars, I had been already into cars since I was, for the last like 3 or 4 years before that, since I ever got my license really. And I had a 4-bagger. You know, I had an Integra, so this thing felt super duper fast. And the best thing that I could describe about it was, again, that pendulum weight. Like, I had a lot of trouble trying to handle that bike. And it was probably mostly because I was, you know, really young and I was a skinny mofo. I probably weighed like 125 pounds. And it was a lot of weight to actually balance. But it was a fun bike. I did a lot of mistakes in it. Let's see. I learned how to, and I'll say this, I learned how to keep my hand on the throttle like all noobs do. When you're like trying to slow down, or the bike kind of gets away from you because you're accelerating too fast and you keep holding that throttle and it keeps going forward. Yeah, I did that on that bike. I dropped that bike as well. I've actually dropped all my bikes. And I'll say that, yeah, I'll be happy to admit it. I've dropped all of my bikes. That bike, that I dropped that one from going to a stop and just putting my foot down wrong. So I basically just tipped that motherfucker over. Like right now, if I was coming to a stop and I didn't have my feet balanced, I think I kicked my feet both out like that, like I did with a bicycle. And that kind of fucked me up. That'll mess anyone up though. But yeah, man, I did that with that bike. I stalled like crazy on that bike because it was actually like it was like a manual transmission motorcycle. It was the clutch was kind of weird to me and all the other kind of stuff, and braking was kind of weird. I didn't take the MSF course, but somehow I survived at F3, and I only had it for like 6 months or so before I moved away. Let's see, the next bike that I had that I really learned a lot about motorcycling on was my Ninja 250, and I still miss that bike to this day. I still miss that bike, and it was a 2000 model, so it was like one of the old boxy looking 250s, and I specifically remember picking that thing up from one of my friends that had just moved. I think he moved back to Egypt, so he had his bike still here in the States, and he just needed to get rid of it. Like, I PayPal'd him for it because I knew him and everything, and I got a pretty good deal on it, and it was sitting in his apartment, and his roommate helped me actually push the bike out. And this was my first experience, well, I guess my first experience having to deal with cars, because the CBR was fine. Like, it came from a motorcycle shop, so it had been all tuned up and everything. This came from his house, and it had been sitting in his apartment for like 4 months or so. So there was some work that needed to actually be done on that bike, but somehow we got it to start. I brought a friend with me that had been riding bikes for a while, like an F4 or whatever, and we checked it out. We got it running after like 5 or 10 minutes. It's trying to crank it, getting the gas back through the carbs and all that kind of stuff, and it cranked and it ran. And that bike was so light. I remember that bike being so damn light, and I loved it because of how light it was. And it wasn't slow to me. Like when you're on a motorcycle, your perception of speed is completely different than when you're in a car. It's the same as, all right, if you've ever, maybe if you haven't ridden a motorcycle before and you've driven a couple of different cars, you know that a small car, like Miata or a Civic or something, like a slow car, feels like you're going fast at slow speeds. And then a faster car, more heavier, bigger car, like let's say you're in a BMW 5 Series or a 7 Series or any other like family sedan, that thing is gonna feel like it's not gonna feel like you're going like 60 or 70 miles per hour. You're gonna feel like you're going a lot slower. So on the Ninja 250, I felt like it was still going pretty quickly. And I don't weigh a lot, even right now, but back then I still didn't weigh that much. And it felt like great to me. It was really nimble. I could handle it perfectly fine. The weight didn't feel like it was extraordinary, and it revved like crazy. So it was a cool bike. Love that thing. I had that thing for quite a few actually. I've had that thing, and I rode that thing every day. That became my daily driver. And that's the bike that really made me fall in love with motorcycles. Now, I will say I did learn, again, stupid shit on that bike. One, I learned that downshifting too many gears will freaking lock up the rear and cause you to kind of like fishtail out and slide. So that's one thing, because I had cars back then, so I was like, oh, okay, well, I'm heading into a corner, I want to power out of it, I'm going in 4th gear, so I'll just drop down 2 gears, rev match, and it'll be fine. Now do that on my bike. Nope, do that on your bike, and the rear end starts kind of kicking out, and it's, and I was able to recover it because it was a light bike. It's like 300 pounds. So, there you go with that. Another thing that I learned, well, I was saying, I said that I dropped all my bikes. I did drop that one, also at a light. And it wasn't because I put my feet down wrong. It was because there was a ticking noise or something, and I stopped, I bent down, I was looking at something towards the bottom of the bike and behind me, and I dropped it. I lost my balance when I did that, and I dropped it. So now I know not to freaking do that on a motorcycle when you hear a weird noise or whatever, to bend down all the way onto one side to look, because yeah, you could tip your bike over. So make sure you have that good balance and everything. when you're actually working with it. And I loved how that bike revved. It revved like crazy. But it was also, again, like, it was a carb bike, so it was my first experience tinkering with that thing. And I will say that carbs, it was, that bike was jetted before. And the guy never tuned it in right that had it. And I don't think it was my friend. I think it was the previous owner beforehand, him. But it wasn't tuned in right. So it had a really, really bad flat spot between like 4 and 6.5, 5,000 RPM. So the 2,000 RPM range where there was a flat spot that would cause the bike to actually hesitate. Before then and after that, if you power through it, it was completely fine. But during that little part, yeah, there was a flat spot there, and I could never, ever, like, I couldn't tune it out. I didn't know, you know, I didn't know that much about carbs. So it was never tuned out. I just learned that, okay, when it gets to like between those RPMs, like 4 and 5.5, 6 grand, just to freaking rev through it. And that was fine. That's that's how I dealt with it. And I also learned a lot about motorcycle maintenance and everything with that bike. It was super easy to actually take care of. And then that brings me to this bike that I have right now, the 650. This is my favorite bike that I've owned of all of them, because it is something that I could use like every single day, like what I'm doing right now. Like I'm not just riding, but I'm also out like running some errands and everything. I can use this bike every freaking day for anything that I need to use it for, and it's great. And it's got good power, it's got good torque. It's right now what fits in my life. Now things are going to change in my life, of course, and there's always going to be other bikes that I want, stuff like that. But for right now, this fits what I need it for. It's cheap to run, all that kind of stuff. I don't have to worry too much if I fuck it up. Or whatever. Of course I don't want to fuck up anything that I actually own, but it's not like, you know, a brand new bike. And I've never owned a brand new bike before, but hey, whatever. Bike is also carbed, but it's factory stock. They never really modded this bike, which I'm glad. They never modded the carbs, or I would be pissed, because carbs are something that I am just not comfortable with dealing with right now. One day I'm sure I'll learn more about it and be completely fine with it. Basically, when something breaks and I have to go in and actually do something, yeah, that's when I actually learn. That's when I actually learn about the actual mechanics of something. It's just by doing. Just by doing. So man, there's my bike history. It spanned the time of, God, a really long time. Like over, yeah, well over 10 years. 13 or 14 years ago was when I was first introduced and started riding. And there was, of course, breaks in between. I haven't been riding every single year between then, but yeah, man. That's it. If you got anything to share about your history of bikes, please do. And tell me a little bit about your bike, you know, what it was like, what you liked about it, all that kind of good stuff that I just kind of went through. And of course, I mean, with this bike out, and again, I mentioned I dropped it, so let me talk about when I dropped this bike. Again, I've dropped all my bikes. When I dropped this bike, I was actually leaving and just pulling out, and then I stalled the damn thing, and I didn't expect to actually stall it, so it lurched forward. I didn't have my balance, and it tipped over, it fell on the side. So there you go, dropped all my freaking bikes, all of them. I've dropped them all. I'm happy to admit it. But anyways, that's it for now, guys. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.